Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. I do truly appreciate it. And I just finished a book. Go figure, I read a book. But this is a book that I really enjoyed by what I would have to call one of my favorite new authors. Not necessarily a new author, but new to me and newly one of my favorites. And I've talked about a few of his books before. I keep banging on the table. See that? A few of his books before. The name is Ian Rogers, and I just read a book called Sycamore. This one published by Cemetery Dance with absolutely beautiful cover artwork by Ben Baldwin. And not only does it look great, but it helps to illustrate a little, some aspects of the story. So the graphic design, man, it is fabulous. It just looks so good. I would love to have a signed limited hardcover edition of this book with that Ben Baldwin artwork on it. He's one of my favorites. Always seems to impress. But the book by Ian Rogers, published by Cemetery Dance, brand new, 2024, is a Felix Wren supernatural PI sort of detective, SuperNOIRtural, if you will. And that's a phrase that Ian has coined. I don't know if he invented it or somebody else did. I don't know where it came from. I've never heard of it before. SuperNOIRtural, supernatural noir. Get it? But I am a big fan of detective stories. I always have been. Before I was a reader, I was a fan of detectives, PIs, Magnum PI, Spencer for hire, just to name a few. And then later on, as I grew a little bit more mature and could handle some of the classic films like The Maltese Falcon with Sam Spade, The Thin Man with Nick and Nora Charles, and then later on as a reader, figuring out that, hey, some of these great stories are based on great books. And the couple I just mentioned were Dashiell Hammett books that I both have read and loved. But then onto other things, things that kind of mash them up a little bit. And the detective genre doesn't necessarily have to be a private investigator. There's been all sorts of cool stuff that involves the same sort of things. I'm a big fan also of Lawrence Block, and he's got the Matthew Scudder series, which Scudder is a sort of a detective. But then the Bernie Roddenberry, the burglar series. He's not a private investigator. He's not a cop or a detective in any way. He's a burglar. But he ends up doing some of the same stuff. F. Paul Wilson's Repairman Jack, an urban mercenary, if you will. A little bit more action. But again, he's trying to solve things. He's trying to fix things. He's trying to whodunit sort of things. And that, I love that type of story. And I love it when authors mix it up a little bit. They don't just try to do Robert B. Parker Spencer. They take some of that stuff and they mix it up with their own stuff or other stuff. Mix it all up and make it fun. And so that's what Ian Rogers has done with the Felix Wren series. He's taken the detective, the classic PI gumshoe, and he's added other stuff. He's added monsters. He's added vampires, and he's added shapeshifters, and he's added the black-eyed kids. He's added mimics. He's added other things to the genre, and they all sort of center around something that he created called the Black Lands. And I'm not going to go too deep into all of these things. I don't want to spoil stuff, but there's a lot of neat stuff to be had. But essentially, you've heard of the Bermuda Triangle, probably. Growing up in the 80s, the Bermuda Triangle was something that people were still talking about quite a bit. But in this book, there's an explanation for the Bermuda Triangle. And it didn't just stop there. It keeps getting worse and worse and worse. These new portals keep opening up. Once you go in, you either don't come out, or if you do, you're changed. But the problem is other bad things also come out. Things like vampires and shapeshifters and yada, yada, and yada. All the things that I just mentioned, including a creature called a mimic, which, read on. But these portals lead to another world and another dimension, and it's called the Black Lands. And that's something that Ian has created, and this book is part of the Black Lands series. And I don't want to make things too complicated, but essentially this is a novel that's brand new, the first Black Lands novel. And it's a great one. It's published by Cemetery Dance. But before that, Ian had written several, 4 or 5 short stories. I think one might be a novelette. I don't know. Short stories about the SuperNOIRtural tales. He would have a story, come up with this Felix Wren character, wrote a story, and then another and another. He wrote several of them, 4 or 5, 6, I don't know. And he published them, eventually collected them all in a collection here called SuperNOIRtural Tales. We just talked about that. And I did a review on that, and I loved it. They work very well. If you've ever watched something like KOLCHAK the Night Stalker, you would see, it's not exactly the same, but KOLCHAK was a reporter. But you would watch an episode, in KOLCHAK there would be some event that happened, and KOLCHAK would say, hey, that's not just a normal old sort of a murder thing, and he'd go and investigate it, and he would get in trouble, and he would big things, bag things. It would fun. You'd find out what the deal was at the end, and then boom, that's your story. And then the next episode, the next week, it would be same KOLCHAK, same town, same job, and he'd stumble into another story. And that's kind of what this is for 4 or 5 or 6, I can't remember now, different stories, standalone stories. As it goes on, you learn a little bit more about your main character, relationships develop and stuff like that. And that's what this is. And the way I understand it, this set will be published at some point, hopefully by Cemetery Dance before too long, and you can read it. And the way Ian explained it to me is it'll work just fine by reading Sycamore, this novel, and then these will be published as a sort of a prequel set of stories. So even though they were first, this is being published on a bigger scale first. I tried to buy this book and I couldn't find it. I had to go directly to the author, and he was kind enough to help me send me a copy of this book. It was kind. It was a gift. Sent me a copy of this book, signed it. I tried to buy it and I couldn't. So sometimes I get lucky. Know what I'm saying? But anyway, that will be published at some point, the way I understand, by Cemetery Dance. And so this novel's out. Most of us will be reading this novel or have a chance to read this novel first. And it works. It works just fine. Ian does a good job of easing you into the story, getting you familiar with Felix. Felix Wren is our main character here. And Sandra, who he calls D, Sandra D, who is a failed actress, Felix's ex-wife. Now she's sort of Felix's office person, POA, as they call in the business today. Secretary. Felix's office person is POA. And they're divorced, but they still care about each other. They're not exactly on the best of terms, and he mentions it in here. No, it's one of the things I love about reading Ian Rogers is so many, boom, light bulbs come on. That came from there. Maybe I'm wrong sometimes, maybe I'm right. Sometimes he flat out mentions it. He says there are no Nick and Nora Charles from The Thin Man, both the series of movies and the book by Dashiell Hammett. So every time I read a little blip like that, it brings a smile to my face, knowing that this author likes some of the same stuff that I like. And then other things would come up throughout the book. I had to make some notes. There was a character in this book that some of the things he said kind of reminded me of a character from ever heard of Lethal Weapon? Lethal Weapon 3 and 4. Character named Leo Getz, whatever you need, Leo Getz. There was a character in here that I couldn't help but Leo Getz popped in my head, and I wondered. Book had me wondering sometimes. Was he thinking what I'm thinking? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But it just kept happening over and over and over. So I mentioned stuff like Magnum PI a couple of times popped in. Him mentioning somebody raising their eyebrows. And of course, if you watch Magnum PI in the opening credits, there's a spot where he's got a big smile and he raises his eyebrows. He talks about the Incredible Hulk. There's a character that is going to be bursting out of its garments. And he mentioned how the Incredible Hulk probably had to deal with such things. There's a scene where a monster got racked in the head with a broomstick. You'd think it would have blown him apart. Instead, he didn't sell it at all, but it said that he kind of turned his head side to side. Another monster once did that in the movie, but became very famous. Michael Myers, by the way. He mentioned lots and lots of detective stuff. And so when I jump into noir, the first thing that pops in my head is always Sam Spade. And as much as I love Dashiell Hammett, when I think of Sam Spade and the Maltese Falcon, I just can't help it. I spent a lifetime watching Humphrey Bogart. And while it's in the same genre, Felix Wren is not Humphrey Bogart. He doesn't go slapping the piss out of somebody, and he doesn't say when you're slapped, you'll take it and like it. He's not that kind of a guy. But he does have some of the same stuff. He doesn't want to get involved. He doesn't want to do something, but he's got to. And he goes off and does it anyway. That's a form of bravery. He's afraid. He's apprehensive. He knows it's not a good idea. He's got to do it anyway. Other little things in here that made me smile. There's a character in this book called Alice Baffle. And Alice starts off as one thing and becomes something else. But Alice Baffle is an agent for the PIA, for the Paranormal Investigative Agency, Alice Baffle. And she is a hard character, a straight-laced woman. She is strictly business. She's tough as nails, no sympathy for nothing, determined, fearless, seemingly fearless. Anyway, a great character, which I believe we will see again in more novels. And I think there's a spinoff coming, perhaps with her as a main character. I don't know. I hear things sometimes. But Alice Baffle said something like this: "I'm so hungry I could eat the ass end out of a dead werewolf." And the only time I've ever heard anything remotely similar to that was by one of my favorite guilty pleasure favorite actors, Gary Busey. You talk too. And that was in Point Break, and he ate the ass end out of a dead rhinoceros. But little things like that just kept popping up, made me wonder, does this guy watch some of the same stuff I watch? And does this guy read some of the same stuff I read? There was even a part where he's asking for somebody to do him a favor, find something for me, and get it to me within an hour. And the guy said, "You're going to give me an hour? It'll take 10 minutes. What am I going to do for the next 50 minutes? And I heard a guy named J-Rock from the Trailer Park Boys say something about that. Something about like that. Know what I'm saying? I wonder. These things just kept popping up. I wonder. Maybe it's all me. Maybe we've watched some of the same things at some point. But anyway, Felix Wren, he's his wife, his ex-wife, secretary. She's not happy. She wants more money. She's a failed actress. She wants money. She wants things. She works for him. She says, "I need a raise," and he can't pay her. He's broke. He's not making much money. At the same time, he's been in prior events before this book. He's been enrolled in paranormal investigations, and he doesn't want to be a part of that. He doesn't want it, but he's well known for that. He doesn't like it. It ain't healthy. It doesn't lend itself to a nice, long, happy life. And he gets a chance to take on a case that seems not paranormal in the least. And another thing, the stories are set in and around Toronto in Canada, which is another neat thing. I don't always read stories that are set in Canada. So it's cool. It takes me out of the normal New York City, Los Angeles, Boston, Hawaii. Takes you out of some of these normal settings or some settings that we're familiar with, puts us somewhere else. And so he goes to this town called Sycamore. And you're going to find out why they call it Sycamore and why it maybe doesn't make sense to somebody that's new in town. But there's a lady named Susan Weaver, whose husband, Doug, he's wanted for murder, and he's disappeared. Susan believes that he has been murdered himself, and she wants to hire Felix to find his body so that her husband's name can be cleared of murder, meanwhile proving that he's been murdered. kind of a screwed up situation there. And at the same time, these portals to the Black Lands keep popping up in new places. They just keep coming. Another one appears, another one appears. At some point, it's going to reach a critical mass, and I'm sure that hopefully, we'll be able to read about it in future novels and stories and such as that. But Felix needs the money, he needs the job, and he wants to avoid the paranormal stuff, so he takes on this job in Sycamore, a couple hours from his home in the city. And as you would expect, things just don't go as planned. But it's a very good book. It's got a chilling spot in there. In fact, there's a spot where I read it and it was it doesn't happen to me a lot when I'm reading books, but I got chills. I said, oh no. Oh, bad words. But it was fabulous. And we get introduced to a couple of new characters in this book. One would be a lady called Alice Baffle, who I mentioned is an agent for the PIA. And she's a great character. And there's more to come with Alice. I really dig it. And it's not a romantic relationship, but they sort of become partners, pals in that way. Although she's probably never going to say anything nice about Felix ever. And her actual partner is an agoraphobe living in a house in some town they mentioned in Florida. And she's also an agent, and she is Alice's partner from home. She works from home. Very 2024 of you. She works from home. She's a computer genius, and Einstein. She finds everything. She can do everything online. But she's the character, as an agoraphobe, a character who seems to have a higher opinion of humanity and of the world, and a sense of humor and compassion and all that stuff. Meanwhile, Alice seems to have none of that stuff. But anyway, I don't want to give away too much stuff about the story. I've told you practically nothing except set the table for you. A fabulous book. I cannot wait for Sycamore 2 or whatever it's going to be called. Whatever there's got to be a sequel. There's got to be 10 sequels as far as I'm concerned. Can't wait for the next one. I want more of Felix Wren, and I want more of Alex Baffle, and more of Diane, and more of Sandra D. More of this stuff. It's a great world, a great character. I love the genre, and Ian Rogers has knocked it out of the park. He's hit another home run for me. So when I rate a book, sometimes it's hard to compare books. But when I read a book, I'm done with it. I close it up. I say, here's what I feel about this. When I read this book, I say, bam, 5 stars. I don't even say, it's a 4-star read. For me, it's 5. Now, rating stuff to me gets kind of screwy, and I don't like it. Because I want to say I really like that book, or I like that book a lot, or I kind of liked it, or I didn't really like it that much. This one, I really like that book. And so if I really like a book, I got to say, well, it gets the highest grade. It did the trick for me. It did the job for me, and that's what I'll rate it 5 stars. Now, there's been books that I've liked that I've rated 4 stars, but there were things about it that kind of bothered me, so I knock it down a little bit. That being said, there's a lot of 5-star books in my opinion, and some are better than others. And that's where the whole rating system just gets screwy. Before you know it, you're going to have to give something 5.5 or 5 3/4 or 6 stars. Now we're not going to do that. 5 stars means it was a very good book that I liked a lot. It was a great book. And this is it for me, 5-star book. Got no problems with it. I enjoyed every little bit of it, and I wanted more. I liked the way it ended. I liked the way it wrapped up, and I wanted more, and 5 stars is all I can give it. Never a consideration for anything else. But anyway, that's a lot of talking about a book that was great. I do strongly recommend you go out and get Sycamore by Ian Rogers. And then go get some more from Ian Rogers. When it's available, go get SuperNOIRtural Tales. Also, let's do some more stuff here. I think a publisher named Earthling Publications. They published, this was the first book I read from Ian Rogers, called Family. I think there's limited edition signed versions of this book available here. Also PS Publishing out of the United Kingdom. Here is a novella Gray by Ian Rogers, the second thing I read of his. And it's fabulous as well. It's also supernatural noir. He does it very well. You can tell this is his passion. Anyway, that being said, I can think of no more lies to tell, so thank you for your time. I do truly appreciate it, and c'est la vie. Baby. Doop.